G'day, it's Nigel here from Sax School. In our series of videos about great saxophone players, this week I want to tell you about one of my absolute favourite commercial saxophone players, Kirk Whalum. Now, if you already know about Kirk, then I can't wait to hear what you think about my favourite album and track suggestions that I'll have for you in a second. But if you've never come across Kirk before, then you're in for an absolute treat because this guy is absolutely amazing. Plus, I've got a solo transcription for you too, and I've got some tips for you later on about how you can get some of Kirk's style into your playing too. Lots to talk about, so let's go. Inside Sax School, we're constantly talking about all different styles of saxophone music, from blues to jazz, ska, pop, even classical. And in our series of great players so far, we've really covered quite a few people. We've talked about Charlie Parker, Sonny Rollins, blues legend Sam the Man Taylor, and funk icon Maceo Parker. You can see the whole playlist up here, but today we're talking about a commercial legend. Now, he's one of my absolute favourite players. That's Kirk Whalum. And I always think of Kirk as a commercial saxophone player, but you might be more familiar with the term smooth jazz. Some people think of him as a pop sax player. He's actually recorded probably the most famous pop sax solo ever in the history of the world. I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. Either way, Kirk's music is accessible, it's jazz, it's pop, it's R&B. It's a bit of a mix of all that sort of stuff. So let's find out a bit more about him. Kirk Whalum was born in Memphis and he grew up in a really musical family. His dad was a minister too, so unsurprisingly, Kirk grew up in that whole gospel scene, and that's really a big part of his life and career. So in the 80s, Kirk was really busy in the Houston, Texas club scene with his own band. And there's a really fantastic story that Andy Snitzer told me in one of the sessions that he did with Sax School. If you haven't seen those sessions, Andy is busy these days playing with guys like Paul Simon and Billy Joel, the Rolling Stones. Really amazing player. But back then, back in the 80s, he was actually still at university and had been plucked out of university to go on tour with the musical icon Bob James. Now, Andy told me the story that they were on tour, him and Bob James were on tour across America, and when they got to Houston, they had a support act that was playing before them. So Bob and Andy are watching the support act before their set starts. And Andy's telling me how the two of them were sat there absolutely transfixed by this incredible saxophone player that they'd never really heard of before. And he was just absolutely amazing, blew their mind. Well, guess who that saxophone player was? It was Kirk Whalum. And actually, that was a really interesting point in time. It was 1984, and that was the very start of Kirk's relationship with Bob James that spanned a whole bunch of musical projects. It led to Kirk's first #1 song and a Grammy nomination. Pretty amazing stuff. So the first few solo albums that came from Kirk after that meeting with Bob James are a really great place to start listening to Kirk and understanding his style. First album was called Floppy Disk. That's great, some fantastic tracks. But my favorite is Cache, which came out in 1992. And this was actually the very first of Kirk's albums that I ever heard. My favorite track from this album is Love is a Losing Game. Really brilliant. It's such a great example of Kirk, particularly early Kirk, putting all of his energy and expression into his playing, and with that fantastic big sound that he's got. I love that track. It was also around this time that Kirk did a fantastic album with Bob James called Joined at the Hip. I love that album. It's absolutely fantastic. There's so many great tracks on it, including a really brilliant groovy version of Midnight at the Oasis, and it's got a fantastic soprano solo. Now, through the 90s, Kirk was massively in demand as a session player. He recorded with Barbra Streisand, Al Jarreau. You can hear him with Luther Vandross, Larry Carlton, Quincy Jones, and of course, Whitney Houston. So you must remember the movie The Bodyguard. Classic, iconic, and it's got that fantastic track, I Will Always Love You, with the mega saxophone solo. Well, of course, that's Kirk Whalum, because Kirk Whalum was touring around with Whitney at the time. And there's a brilliant story that Kirk tells in his live shows about when he recorded that solo. They actually recorded it live. They were behind the curtain on the movie set because that's the way that Whitney Houston wanted to do it. That in itself is incredible because that solo is mega. And that track went absolutely stratospheric. I mean, it's still the best-selling single by a female artist of all time. The soundtrack won a Grammy too. It's amazing. So even if you hadn't heard Kirk Whalum's name before today, then I'll guarantee that you've heard his playing because just about every adult in the Western world has heard that track. Now, following the period with Whitney, Kirk's been really consistently releasing amazing albums. To date, I think he's done like 25 albums so far, so there's plenty to choose from. A couple of my other favorites are For You, that was a huge commercial success for Kirk, and I love the track Ascension, the Maxwell track on that, brilliant. Also check out the album Unconditional. This is a fantastic album. The opening track is brilliant too. Now Till Forever. I really love that. It's a great example of Kirk's beautiful warm sound and his amazing expression. Another series of albums that you've got to check out if you're just starting to learn about Kirk is his Gospel According to Jazz recordings. I think he's done 4 of them now, and they're packed with just amazing players. Amazing players, amazing songs, amazing performances, some great solos. And if you want to dig into them, actually, there's some fantastic videos on YouTube of him doing those live shows. So I guess they toured those live shows and then recorded them from the live shows. As I'm recording this, it's coming up to Christmas and Kirk has just released a brand new Christmas album, How Does Christmas Sound? So I tell you what, that's definitely going to be on my playlist for the holidays for sure. Just before we dig into Kirk's style, do you have a favourite Kirk Whalum track or an album? Let me know in a comment, I'd love to know. Now for me, I'm always trying to make a real connection with the music when I'm playing saxophone, and that's something that I'm always listening for in other players too. So it's really, really important to me, and I think Kirk Whalum really does this better than just about anybody else in the commercial setting. Kirk's sound, it's so full, it's so rich, and most importantly, he's got a really fantastic way to getting as much meaning as possible into every single note that he plays. You know, it's the same when you see him live as when you listen to the recordings. I've seen him a bunch of times live, both in the States and here in the UK, and every time it's absolutely killer. If you like the commercial side of saxophone, then in my opinion, Kirk is really the benchmark that we should all be aiming for. And to be honest, I suspect that all the other commercial players on the scene are probably listening to what Kirk is doing as well. Okay, let's dig into a transcription. So I want to dig into a solo to help you and me really understand Kirk's style. It's a brilliant way to really understand a player. And we could, of course, look at the classic I Will Always Love You solo, but I've already made some lessons on that inside the Sax School members area. So I thought instead we might do something a little bit different and look at the solo from Midnight at the Oasis. So that's from that Bob James album, Joined at the Hip, that I mentioned a little while ago. Now this track's actually on soprano, and I love Kirk's soprano sound. I think it's fantastic, so warm, such a great model. In fact, if you're a soprano player, this is definitely a player that you should check out and sort of model yourself around. Plus, it's also interesting that in this short solo, it's only 8 bars, you can hear a lot of the things that are iconic Kirk-isms, I suppose. Stylistic things that you'll hear on all of his other solos, whether he's on soprano or on tenor. Okay, let's take a listen to the solo. Man, I love that solo. It's only 8 bars, but there really is so much going on in there. Straight out the gate though, it's really important to notice that with Kirk Whalum's playing, it's always actually rhythmically and melodically quite simple. He's not playing super fast flourishes and screaming up around the altissimo and all that sort of stuff. Instead, he's playing very, very rhythmical lines and clear melodic ideas. And that's a great thing for us to be thinking about when we're making up our own solos. Also, throughout this solo and all the way through Kirk's playing, there's tons of little decorations. So you need to listen closely to the way he's scooping up to some notes and doing little bends, the way he does his grace notes, the way he does his articulations. I've written quite a lot of them into the transcription, and you can grab the transcription from the link down below here. But I really urge you, if you download the transcription and start learning this solo, that you spend a lot of time listening to Kirk's playing and really trying to focus in on the way that he does these little details, because that's really what makes the difference here. Now, all of those details are subtle, but they're all really identifiable as Kirk's style. So if you want to capture that magic, you really got to look at the details. Hey, don't forget you can grab this free PDF from our blog. We put all of our free stuff like this into our Sax School locker. It's absolutely free to access, and you can register for it from the Sax School blog. Now, of course, if you're a Sax School member, you'll find this transcription and all the other Kirk Whalum lessons inside our member area lesson library too. Hey, that's it for today. Thanks so much for watching, and I really hope that you got some value out of it. Please let me know in a comment if you like these type of lessons, or if you've got another artist that you'd like us to cover, because it really helps us to make better videos. And remember, if you really want to get your saxophone playing on track, if you want to dig into this commercial style or maybe any other style of playing, then come and see what we're doing at Sax School, because there's just so many great resources in there. And as I'm filming this, we've actually got a 14-day trial running, which means that you can jump in, try out a bunch of lessons, you can get some help from our tutors, engage with our community, and see if Sax School is right for you. All the links and everything are down below. Okay, have some fun, keep practicing hard, and I'll catch you next time.